Katelynn Giordano.
Dr. Dave!
How are you today, my friend?
Oh, super fabulous because I'm here with you. How are you?
Oh, I am so ready to have a conversation with you tonight. Like,
this is going to be a good one.
Seriously, it is the center of my week in metaphorical senses and in literal senses. This is the highlight of all that I get to do. I am so excited about our talk tonight.
I'm so excited. This week is the one that I've been really looking forward to. So I cannot wait.
You didn't enjoy the last 3 weeks?
I've loved the last 3 weeks. Like, love is not even a strong enough term for how I felt about the last 3 weeks. This is the topic that I have some really big feelings about. So.
Okay. Well, in just a minute, we'll introduce all of that fun stuff so that people know exactly what we're going to be talking about. This is week 4 of Focus on the Focus. We are going to probably get a little bit passionate tonight. We've kind of got the black and white thing here, the devil and the angel. I don't know what it is, but we've got some symbolism going on because this is going to be a fun conversation. It's going to be a spirited conversation. It might even be a loud conversation, but I'm ready for it. Are you ready for it, Katelynn?
Always ready, Dave.
All right, people, this is your chance. Go get a drink, go get a pen, go get a pencil. You got 52 seconds. We'll be back. All right, Katelynn, before we jump into our heated conversation tonight, let's do some housekeeping real quick. StreamYard, which is the platform that we use for this, is having issues today. Lots and lots of issues where they keep bouncing people out. So if you are watching this and you're still able to see this and you're on Facebook, do me a favor. Go into the Teach Better Team group page and just let people know that you can still see this on one of these other platforms on YouTube or where you're watching this on Facebook or Twitter or wherever it is, because people are getting bounced in and out. I'm seeing the numbers spike up and down. I know what's happening to people. So go in there, tag people, say, get over there and keep watching this. StreamYard's having some issues, but we want to make sure that anybody that wants to be part of this conversation can be here. So, all right, you ready for this talk, Katelynn?
So ready. Are you ready, Dave?
I'm ready. Let's start by saying hello to the people that were able to find us somewhere on the social media universe. We got Ray Porton joining us he's close to you. He's over there in Northern Illinois, leading amazing teachers, and Rob Breyer, AKA the guiding principals from North Carolina, joining us. We got Holly Stewart, another Carolina friend, joining us. Holly is absolutely amazing. Nikki says this is her favorite hour of the week, which is confusing because I thought Brain Break was her favorite hour of the week. She likes you way better than Jeff. I got you. Yeah. So many amazing friends joining us from all over the place. I'm just going to keep clicking here because we got people that are just popping in all over the place. So,
Hi, Neil.
Right. Now you're nervous, aren't you? Because the one and only Neil Gupta joining us. Just to listen to you, to judge and critique every word you say, Katelynn.
Better be on my A game.
You're always on your A game or your 4 game or your high 5 game. We can start talking arbitrary grading, but that was week 1. But this is week 4. I'm going to do a quick recap real quick, Katelynn, and I'm going to toss it to you. We talked before we went live, and you've got a lot of things that you want to say, and I'm going to shut up and just let you say those things in just a minute. But for those people that are tuning in right now for the first time, this is your first ever Focus on the Focus, no worries. We're going to be talking some stuff that you're going to be able to pick up on and join in the conversation. If you've been a part of the ride for all 4 weeks, we're also going to be building on the conversation and maybe making some connections back. Week 1, we kind of just painted that overview, all things grading. We talked about why it's important, why this is a conversation that you and I are both super passionate about. Week 2, we talked about measuring what matters, how to dive in and actually focus on the focus, if you will, which really is where the name of this came from. How do you identify those priorities and the things that you really want to be zeroing in on? Then last week, we talked zeros, deadlines, all of those taboo topics. It was the Sir Mix-a-Lot hour where we tackled all those big butts that people throw into the conversation. We also threw people a little freebie this week, and people didn't know it was coming during the 12-hour live. We got to connect a little bit too. And then that brings us to today, Katelynn. Today. Katelynn, before I go any further, today, what is the conversation today?
Okay, so today, everyone, we are talking about formatives and summatives. And we know all of you that have been joining us, and those of you that are just joining us now, you're here because you are ready to poke the bear. You are ready to have some of these hard conversations. You're ready to tackle some of these difficult problems that we face as educators in this big old institution of education. And we want to start off by talking about formative versus summative. But because I'm an English teacher, we have to get down to semantics. And it's always important. This is just kind of a random, like offsides kind of like tip that I have. Anytime that you're about to enter in a conversation that is difficult, that might be considered taboo, that might have some controversial topics come up, it's important to start by having that common understanding of what it is you're talking about. So I wanted to start by talking about what formative and summative mean, because there is a lot of misconception out there. And one of the things that really grinds my gears is when people talk about formatives.
Hold on, time out. I thought I was the old one in this, and you're bringing out grinds my gears?
Yes!
Okay. Way to censor yourself, but keep going.
Thank you. I'm trying to keep it PG, Dave. So one of the things that gets me is when we talk about formatives and summatives and we say, okay, well, yeah, formatives are what happens during learning and summatives are what happens when learning is over. And I bet you all know what my problem is with that. Learning is never over, especially if you're going to provide opportunities for retakes, reassessments, and all those things that we know we should do in our classrooms. The learning is not over. So instead of defining formative and summative assessments in that way, I always try to say it as a different kind of semantic issue. So I'm going to get down to like a really specific definition here. Formatives are the assessments that you do during instruction. When you are giving direct instruction, small group instruction, any kind of instruction, the formative assessments are those checks for understanding when instruction is happening. Summatives are what happen at the end of planned instruction. So at the end of a unit, at the end of a project, that is where the summative happens. Not when the learning is done, but when the instruction that you planned is done. Now, it allows for that flexibility as well, because we all know that sometimes the instruction doesn't end when we thought it would. We have to go a little longer. This definition works within that framework as well. So before we got into anything, I was very settled on making sure that we defined those words properly.
Okay, so I'm glad I let you go first. I told you I wanted to let you go first because once I started going, I might not stop. So let me take what you said and take it a step further. I also want to clarify and add some definition. I want to add some context. I also want to throw in some context as to why we get this wrong and why this matters. Because this is a lot of the other conversations that we've had have been conversations about how you can take the good things you're doing and simply make them better. This is a conversation, I'm going to be very, very, very blunt. When we do this incorrectly, we are committing educational malpractice. I'm saying that very directly and very clearly, because when we do this incorrectly, it actually hurts kids. Doesn't just stop them from growing as much as they could. It actually hurts kids.
It's harmful.
It is harmful for their growth, development, and their learning. So let me paint a little context, if that's okay, and chime in whenever necessary. Also, let me just remind people, again, if you want to jump into the Teach Better group and just tell people we're here, because I still see people getting kicked in and out. Megan Wells is saying it's her fault. She goes in, she says hi, and things crash. So jump in there, tell people we're here, and we'll continue on with this conversation. But so here's the context. This is something that actually started to get misabused about 15 years ago. Here in American educational society, here in America, here in the world, we have a fast food mentality. We want everything quick. We want everything easy. We want to just get to the bottom line, save ourselves the time. We want everybody to give us the Cliffs Notes, just tell us the summary. We want to read the last page of the book before we start it. We want to binge watch TV because we don't want to have to wait a week. We are very, very, very impatient. We want everything now. But the result of oftentimes just wanting things right now is that we get things incorrect. So here's what has happened over the last 15, 20 years. About 20 years ago, a lot of research was done on this topic that we're discussing. When I say a lot of research, it was the epitome of the research that was being done. It was the start of the assessment movement in America, where everybody was preaching about the importance of assessment, rightly or wrongly. There was a lot of research being done on how to do assessment correctly and the value that was attached to quality assessment. But research, as you know, Katelynn, scholarly research, the stuff that is quantifiable or qualitative, the stuff that deals with statistics and analysis is yucky for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that don't like to read that stuff. And they say, just tell me what it says. I don't want to read it. Just give me the Cliffs Notes. So there were a couple of people like me who get to walk around and stand up on a stage and present to people that would go up and they would try to provide the Cliffs Notes version. Some people would then even write books based off of the Cliffs Notes version of what they thought was being said. And what they thought was being said was that there should be formative assessment, there should be summative assessment. What they thought was being said was that they thought people were saying formative assessments are these informal practice activities that shouldn't be worth a whole lot. There's these summative assessments that should carry with them a lot of value. That's what they thought was being said. And they thought it was being said because so many people kept saying it. You can pick up books today from major publishers, major educational publishers that are putting out books that talk about assessment, that have hundreds of citations in the back, that if you follow the cookie crumbs, one citation leads to the next citation, which leads to the next citation. People are citing a book that is citing a book that is citing a book that is citing a book that ultimately cited the Cliffs Notes and never got to the heart of what the research said. We have played the telephone game with this and distorted it so much that now we have this pedagogical belief that we hold on to because there are so many books that got it wrong, so many people that have preached it incorrectly, and so many districts that have created policies and procedures that are based off of inaccurate communication, inaccurate information. So one thing I want to do today is set the record straight.
Yes.
So I'm going to clarify the definition even further.
Do it.
When we're looking at the research, and by research, I'm going to go deeper here. I'm going to geek out a little bit. I'm going to geek out. By research, there's a lot of different kinds of research that we can examine. Typically, when people are talking about research, they're talking about things that are considered peer-reviewed research. Let me explain peer-reviewed research from somebody that lives in higher ed. Peer-reviewed research means you write something and your peers look at it and say, yep, I agree. Your peers have reviewed it. In my day job, I have to write peer-reviewed research. I have to write things and then send it out to other academics who look at it and say, yeah, this aligns with my thinking. And when it aligns with their thinking, you get the rubber stamp and, yep, this was peer-reviewed. Oftentimes, if you are reviewing something that doesn't align with your own construct, it doesn't move forward. Or people send it back to you and say, I'll only approve this with major edits, which means nobody will ever see it. It will never see the light of day. There's a lot of peer-reviewed research right now that is garbage. Put that out there. Because all it does is align with misaligned thinking. But if we were to go back to the research that was quantifiable, done with real reliability, real validity, focusing on what was actually working for kids, there was a big synthesis on what all that research says. And I've talked about John Hattie all the time, but John Hattie, I think if you're going to read anything and you don't want to read all the research, just read John Hattie, because John Hattie did the work for you. He went and did a huge meta-analysis on the research that was done. And John Hattie himself, John Hattie, the researcher that defined all this and talked about making thinking visible and making learning visible, focusing on the things that matter, focusing on the focus. John Hattie very clearly says all assessment should be used formatively and summatively.
Boom.
Notice he didn't say that all assessment needs to be formative or summative. all assessment needs to be used formatively and summatively. He says the best teachers are students of their own work. The best teachers are constantly examining their craft to figure out if what they're doing is working or not. All assessment should lead to the next thing. If you continue to look at Hattie's research, he not only identifies all the things that work, he identifies the stuff that's harmful for kids. One key tenet that is harmful that I want to bring out into this, one thing that actually hurts kids is when we label kids. When we label kids based off of assessment, meaning not there yet, got it, don't got it, proficient, not proficient, that is a harmful practice. Telling a kid they sit at the Bluebird's table, the Redbird's table, that they are smart, they are dumb, they are at risk, they are gifted. All things that we do based off of using assessments formatively to figure out what we need to do next. We are labeling kids as a result of those assessments, which hurts kids, period. Okay, Katelynn, sorry.
Oh my gosh, don't be sorry. No, keep going, because everything you're saying is exactly why we need to be having this conversation. And it's exactly why this conversation is so valuable and so needing to happen, and needing to happen sooner rather than later, because there is such a misconception that exists, and there is such a misuse of these terms. And on top of that, the assessments that we apply them to.
Yes.
So, Dave, I just want you to clarify even further. When you say using assessments formatively and summatively, give us like something to sink our teeth into with that.
Okay.
What does that mean to you?
So glad you asked, Katelynn. So it's funny when you add two little letters to a word, it not only changes the definition of the word, but it changes everything about the word. It changes how we use the word. It takes a word that was a noun, a label-making machine, and turns it into an adverb, which describes an action. Describes an action, because assessment leads to action, number one. So here's the fallacy that we see. And I love that Rebecca has put in here that she heard at a PD ... And I'll talk about the things she heard at a PD later on, because I think that proves the point. We hear at the PD, we hear from that person. We hear from that one random person that got paid money to hold a microphone, who must be an expert because somebody paid them money to hold a microphone, right? Ridiculous. It's garbage. So here's the fallacy. Here's where we miss the mark. So let's just take this construct, if you will. Formative instruction, as you defined it, happens in the point of learning to inform actionable steps so that the teacher and or the student can say, here's where I need to go next. It informs, aka formative, informs, formative, same root. We got it. It's informing where we go next. But here's where we've missed the mark. Whew, so many places. I'm just give you something concrete and tangible. When we say that formative instruction in most places is informal, which takes it a whole different level, meaning it doesn't count for a lot of points. It's not supposed to be graded, as Rebecca said, in some places, or they say it's not supposed to be weighted as highly. And we're going to go there in a second, Katelynn. What we're saying is that we don't have a whole lot of reliability. We don't think that data that we're getting is all that valid, because if it were, we would be treating that like we treat the summative stuff, which is a whole nother issue. So we're saying that this is data that isn't very reliable. It's not extremely valid. It doesn't tell me a whole lot, but that's the stuff I'm going to use to inform my next steps. And then we take this other stuff that we're saying is summative because, it's good. Oftentimes it just means it's more. But we're saying it's better. It's of higher quality. It's more rigorous or more reliable or more valid. And then we can't do anything with it because it's come at the end. Which, excuse my language here, I know we're on Facebook, that's ass backwards. That's ridiculous. For us to say the good stuff we're not going to do anything with, the bad stuff is what we're going to use. How ridiculous is it? I mean, just on the common sense level, we don't even have to do the research to understand that makes no sense. We're going to make informed educational decisions based off of data that we think is no good. It's ridiculous.
I think that sounds great. Let's do that.
Yeah, it's stupid is what it is, Katelynn. Let me give you a real life example that has nothing to do with school.
Hit it.
And again, I apologize, people. Probably not PG, but whatever. I'm going to go here. I have 4 kids. As a father of 4 kids, I have seen my fair share of pregnancy tests. Here's what I know. I know that there are often indicators that lead my wife to think, hey, I should probably take a pregnancy test. Very rarely does she just wake up in the morning and say, hey, let me pee on a stick today. It doesn't happen. There are other clues to say, hey, I might need to take a test. Furthermore, 20 years ago, when you got a positive pregnancy test, you also had to call the doctor and say, now can I come in for another test just to prove that that test was right? Now, do you know what the doctors tell you? If you peed on a stick and it's got a plus sign, you're pregnant. You don't need to come in. The test told me all you need to know. Now go take the prenatals. Now start doing all the things you have to do because there's a baby growing inside of you. The test confirms action. Period. End of story. Maybe I shouldn't have said it, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
No, we're following. No, it
Okay.
makes sense. But the thing that I think too that you brought up that we should definitely get into is this idea of which one's worth more. Because when you're talking about using an assessment formatively, you want to be able to use this to inform your next moves. That's exactly what we want it to be for. And that's what we, if we're doing it correctly, are using it for. We're not using it to label this is where a student is at. We're using it to inform ourselves so that we know what next steps we need to take as instructors, and our students are using it themselves for what steps they need to take as learners. That's what we need to be using it for, which is incredibly valuable. And that brings me into the topic that I have a lot of big feelings about, and that's weighted grades. Because we tend to say that, okay, formatives are going to be worth 30% and summatives are going to be worth 70%. First off, like, I'm going to try not to get too mad right now. We're just sticking a new name on a practice that we've consistently always used forever. We're changing it from saying, okay, tests and quizzes are worth 70% and homework's worth 30 to being, okay, formatives are worth 30 and summatives are worth 70.
So
it's not
all we did
changing.
was change the label. All we did was change the label. You're not teaching in room 16 anymore. You're not teaching in room 18. Same instructional methodology. Just the labels.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay. You've only changed the name of what's on it. That's it. You haven't changed anything about the practice. You haven't changed anything about the way that instructors, educators, students are using the assessment. All you've done is change the name. Fabulous. Wonderful. Then we get into weighting of the grades. Well, that just is inherently saying these formatives just aren't as good, as you were saying before, Dave, or these formatives just aren't worth as much. And it takes the value of a formative from where it should be to way down here, not just for you, but more importantly, for your learners. And it continuously reinforces the idea that the points are the point, that the points are why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this because it's a learning opportunity, because it's a learning experience, because it's a place for me to show my teacher what I know and can do right now, so they know what to do next and I know what to do next. It's not showing them any of those things. It's telling them this is only going to be worth 30% of your overall grade. So if you don't want to do it, it probably isn't going to be that bad. And then it leads to the further conversation. Well, then we should just flip it. Formative should be worth 70% and summative should be worth 30. Awesome. Let's just keep moving the numbers around and not actually addressing the problem. And this is where I start to get irritated, because that only reason that we're talking about flipping them is not because we're saying, okay, looking at the formative, that's a valuable learning experience. It's because we want the kids to do it. So it's using it as an issue or as an instrument for compliance, which everybody knows how I feel about that. If you're using grades, points, percentages as a tool for compliance, you are doing something wrong, because that is not what they are for. And
so Katelynn, let's just, I know we covered this a lot, week 1, week 2, week 3. What are grades for, Katelynn?
They are a communication of where your learner is at a given point in time on an academic skill.
Okay, so I want to take that. I'm so glad you actually added that at a given point in time, because this also leads itself, I'm going to come full circle to talk weighting in a second, but this also leads itself to a conversation about pre-tests and post-test. Okay, so I'm gonna rattle some cages right now. I guarantee it. There are going to be some people that are going to push back, or they're going to listen to this and say, "Oh, I guess I'm done with focus on the focus because I disagree."
Don't leave.
Feel free. Disagree all you want, but don't leave.
But stay.
Push back. Push back if you want to. It's going to help me grow. It's going to help all of us grow. But there are going to be some people that disagree with what I'm about to say. The idea of pre-test and post-test is wrong, period. Using pre-test and post-test is wrong. And let me clarify what I mean by this. I don't mean allowing students to assess multiple times throughout a learning progression is wrong. That is 100% right. Calling anything a pre-test and a post-test is where we miss the mark. Because again, it's that mislabeling, and when we mislabel things, we misappropriate how we use things. If we say it's a pre-test, here's number one, we're saying our own arrogance. When we say it's a pre-test, we're assuming that a student can't learn anything unless we have bestowed upon them some knowledge, which is, teachers, you are amazing. You are the most powerful force in a child's academic and educational career. Know that. But it's also extremely arrogant to think that a child has not or could not have ever learned anything without you. So that's number one. Then also having this concept of a post-test implies that learning, as you already said, stops or is finite or exists somewhere on a continuum from 0 to 100 or from 1 week to 2 weeks. And there's this endpoint, which is also incorrect and inaccurate. I've heard some teachers say, well, I have to have a pre-test and a post-test so that I can show growth. Well, number one, a pre-test and a post-test does not show anything, that does not show any direct impact on what you have done. It simply shows that a kid was alive, because when kids are alive and they experience life, they grow. They learn things, period. And if you can tell me based off of your instructional decisions and your instructional moves that you can pinpoint with accuracy what decisions you made that led a child to grow and improve, amazing. That means that you are a statistical phenomenon. But very rarely are we able to do that. And if you're going to do that so that you can then identify what practices and what pedagogical tools and tricks you need to then implement into the future because you learned that it worked in the past, God bless you. You are using assessment the correct way. If you're simply giving a pre-test and a post-test that you can then label kids and say, Johnny's going to the red table, Susie's going to the blue table, because all students that scored a 55% on this test obviously have the same needs, you are misappropriating assessment. You are, again, labeling kids by a pre-test and post-test. This idea that assessment, all assessment, should lead to the next steps. All grades are feedback representing learning at a given moment in time. Means if a student is able to give you evidence of their learning or their lack of learning or their lack of understanding at any given moment in time, you document it as evidence. But once they start to demonstrate more learning at a future moment in time, that becomes the new evidence. If a student knows something before you teach them, their evidence, their grade, whatever it is that you're documenting should reflect what they know or don't know in that moment of time. Similarly, a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, a year later, whatever they've learned should be documented as evidence of what they know at any given moment in time. It shouldn't be a pre-test and a post-test. Go ahead.
But Dave, what happens if I need to use a pre-test to know what my students know already so that I can use that to instruct them?
Isn't that what we've been saying? Yes. All assessment should inform you about where a kid is so that you can then say, here's where you go next. But for us to call it a pre-test assumes, again, many things. It assumes a kid doesn't know anything. And it's pre-what? Pre-what? Pre-arbitrary moment in time, pre-our instruction. I agree. Assessment always precedes a next step. Assessment should always lead to what's next. Always, always, always. I've heard some people say, okay, Dave, that's fine. I don't grade my pre-tests. Why? Why don't you grade a pre-test? And people will say, because it's not fair, because I'm going to be penalizing a kid, which means, again, we're using grades as carrots and sticks, whips and chains to incentivize compliance. If a kid knows something, give them evidence that they know it. If a kid doesn't know it, collect evidence, document the evidence of what they know or don't know, and move them forward. All assessment, not a pre-test, not a post-test. It's just assessment, period.
And that is, I think, the point that is so valuable here. And it's how we started our conversation today, too. Words and what they mean matter. And when you're talking about giving students an assessment, the minute that you have a label even on that assessment, it takes on a totally different meaning for those students, and it takes on a totally different meaning for you. Words matter. The way that we talk to our students and the way that we approach assessment with them and talk about assessment with them is so important, because it's how they shape their own thinking, not just about tests, projects, assessments, but about learning. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that as the educators, we are modeling, but we're also helping develop their thinking about themselves as learners. So when we talk about using assessment, it's not just us that needs to be using it. It's also our students. And we need to be making sure that the words that we are using to talk about it reflect that and help them see how to use it.
Yes, 1,000%. And I just flashed on the screen a comment that Rob Breyer had. And if it's okay, I want to address this because
yes,
I think it's an important issue. So Rob Breyer is bringing up the idea of state assessments. And I'm going to put an assessment distributor on notice here. NWA, MAPS assessment. I'm calling you out right now as well. Because whether you are Pearson, whether you're NWA, whatever your product is that you are using, number one, your products are designed to help drive people towards more of your products, aka your textbooks and your resources. It's a sales loop, people. It's a pyramid scheme. But I digress. Let's just talk about those state assessments that are oftentimes developed by Pearson and others, but neither here nor there, that are assessing growth, that are pre-test, post-test, right? So to Rob's point, aren't state assessments in essence a pre-test, post-test? They're comparing where a student was to where they are so they can make some sort of determination or label a teacher as good, bad, or ugly, effective or not effective. Very rarely are we using those assessments to truly document and demonstrate our next steps for a student. We're using those to slap a label on students, to slap a label on teachers, to slap a label on schools, which is, again, educational malpractice. But what those assessments are really doing is they are taking a student and they are comparing them to the norm, to the mean, to the average of every other student that took that same test, either in a subgroup at an earlier time or in that moment. It's not comparing them to a standard of excellence. It's comparing them to a norm or a mean. And we've said this before, using the mean for anything is mean. When we're doing that, we have no idea as educators, as leaders, as teachers, what instructional decisions, what instructional practices, what pedagogical decisions led to that growth or that lack of comparative growth. We don't know what our next steps are. All we know is what label to assign a teacher or a student, which does not drive us towards actionable steps. It should never be a comparison game of good, bad, or ugly. And that's what we use it for. If I'm a teacher and I'm getting dinged because my students aren't growing as well as another teacher, I want to know that information. I desperately want to know that information so that I can do something about it. So then my question is, what do I do about it? What do I do? I know that teacher X had scores that were better than mine. Her students grew more than mine. What decisions did she make that led to her growth compared to mine? Did she have her windows open or closed? Were her lights on or off? Did she have kids seated at pods or in rows? Did she write in blue pen or black pen? Like, all of those things truly make a difference. But which one made the difference? All of them did, right? This is the point. Unless you know what your next actionable steps are, oftentimes we resort to what's easiest, and the easiest data for us to use is also the most harmful, which is comparative data. Comparative data does not help drive learning.
Facts. So we are getting a lot of questions right now about what to call it. I understand, folks, the feeling about pre-test. I get it. I am with you. A lot of having that assessment early on is really valuable to help us as educators know what to do next. It helps us understand what to do. So I'm seeing all these questions. What do we call it? What do we do then? Here's how I would suggest approaching it, and something that has worked really, really well for me in my classroom. We've been talking about standards-based, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, about that in a minute. But when you're talking about an assessment that you want to do and have it function as a pre-test, instead of telling your kids, like, okay, everyone, we're going to take a pre-test today, this is how I would approach it. Tell your students what the new learning goal is, the new learning target, the new objective, the new standard. This is our new learning goal that we'll be working on. Here's an opportunity for you to show me what you already know. Here's a chance for you to show me the skills you already have. If you're not sure what I'm asking, that's okay. If you have an idea, show me everything you can. Approaching it that way allows your students to see this as an opportunity to show you what they know. And that is how I would approach it in my classroom. But Dave doesn't agree with me, I can tell.
No, I do agree with you. What I was doing is I was reflecting and I was remembering a story. And I'm trying my best. I don't know if I should tell her or not. I'm going to. Whatever. Most of the people I've ever worked for no longer watch this because they're like, oh my gosh, he's calling us out. Yeah, probably. So I worked in a district before where I was responsible for all curriculum instruction for the entire district. And I proposed at the high school level, mind you, it's high school, which is sometimes high schools work a little bit differently than the rest of the building or the rest of the district. I proposed at the high school level that all classes be given and all students for all classes get the opportunity to assess out or to test out of the classes before on registration day. They could assess out and test out. Not like what they do at the college level where they say, hey, we're going to give you credit for that. And now you just have to take the next course in the sequence. They don't actually give you credit. They just tell you can move up a level. I actually wanted students to be given credit if they could assess out. And you know what I was told? I was told if we do that, we're not going to be able to fill our sections of classes because too many kids will test out. Do you understand? Like whether that would have happened or not, I don't know. But that was the mindset. That we can't allow our students to show us mastery early on because some kids might actually show us they know what we're going to be teaching, and therefore they're not going to need to sit in our class. That is exactly why we need to be doing this. This is exactly why we need students to be able to show us what they know so that we can truly give them an experience that they need. Not necessarily just to fill classroom space, but so that we can truly meet kids where they are and push them from wherever they are to where they need to be next. That's the ultimate goal. Assess so that you can plan for next steps for kids.
Always. Period. That's it.
So Katelynn, I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
I know you hate it when I ask you these questions to put you on the spot. So there's a story that goes with this as well. So if you want to just pass the baton back to me right away, feel free. Okay. So here's the question. We're talking pre-test and post-test. We're talking assessment. We're talking all of these big things. And in people's heads right now, it's okay if they're still thinking assessment in terms of test, quiz, project, presentation, something along those lines. Okay. I don't even want to push back against that right now. When should teachers give an assessment?
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is a phenomenal question. I actually love this question. I'm really glad you asked it.
Okay.
You should be assessing all the time. I don't like the idea of giving an assessment because what we do, and you are already doing this. If you are a good teacher, and you are because you're here, you're already doing this. You are assessing all the time. When your students are responding and participating in class discussions, and you're noticing what they're saying, what misconceptions they have, how correct their answer is, how great their answer is, how much mastery their answer reflects, you're assessing. You're noting to yourself, okay, this student is getting it. Great. I can move on. Or if you have students that are sharing misconceptions, you're noting to yourself, we don't really understand this. And then you backpedal, you take a step back and you teach, you explain, you reteach. That's assessment. You're doing it.
Yes.
When should you give an assessment is such an awkward question for me because I feel like we have this idea of like, okay, giving an assessment. And you said you didn't want to push back at this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Giving an assessment makes us tied to this idea that an assessment is number one, something that I, as a teacher, am controlling, which problematic, number one. Number two, I don't view assessment as just that. Okay, here's the test, here's the project, here's the skills that you like. That's not assessment. Assessment is an active process. It's not a one-stop shop for everyone's going to do this thing now and I'm going to see it. Yes, that is a way that we assess, but that is not assessment be all end all.
Oh, Katelynn, I love having these conversations with you so much. Because I don't know. I think people heard what you just said and they were like, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. But if you agree wholeheartedly with that, it brings up a whole lot more questions, Katelynn.
Always.
Let's take people on the sequence of thoughts in my brain and in my head. I'm going to start by telling a story that I have already told on here before, but it fits into this conversation too. So if people are here for the first time, feel free to listen to this story because it fits. It takes place in about 12 years ago. My first year as an administrator, went to observe an amazing teacher by reputation. Everybody knew she was amazing. I knew she was amazing by reputation. She was organized. She was responsible, did all the things right. Classroom management was impeccable. She knew her content. She was a seasoned veteran. She had all the gimmicks, all the tricks, stood on her head, took the kids outside, did cartwheels, played kickball, did all the things right. In her classroom, she had a calendar. And on her calendar, I went into her classroom on a Monday and I saw that 10 days later, on Wednesday of the following week, she had identified as test day, which again, I told the story before, but that is that pivotal moment that made my head start reeling when I started thinking, how does she know the kids will be ready for a test in 10 days? And if she already knows that the kids will be ready for a test, why does she have to give a test? Why is she putting so much value on test? Why didn't she have every other activity the kids were doing on the calendar? Why did she have test and stars and circles and hearts and glitter? Like all the things were on there, as though this test were the most important thing about everything she was doing. Everything she was doing in her class was building to said test, as opposed to a test or an assessment leading to everything that she was doing. It is a completely different mindset to say, I'm going to teach so that I can give a test, meaning I'm going to do something to you at the end of this, versus I'm going to test so that I can figure out what I need to do. It's like going to the doctors. They run the test and then figure out the treatment plan. They don't just say, start popping a bunch of pills and then come back in a couple of weeks and we'll figure out which one worked for you. They figure out the ailment and then they start to progress. It's the same concept that we have to have in our classrooms, which then here's where it gets kind of muddy, especially this time of year. Final exams are coming up in a lot of places. And
They are.
final exams are a big, big deal in a lot of places. And final exams oftentimes are weighted more heavily than all other assessments all year long in a lot of places. And oftentimes with final exams, the only actionable step is, do you pass the class or not? Because if you fail a final exam, oftentimes a teacher, too late for them to do anything about it other than not give you credit. Which begs another question. Do we even need final exams? You're shaking your head and you're not saying out loud. Okay, so I'll say it. No, we don't.
No.
So what is your reasoning, Katelynn?
So it kind of goes back to everything we've been saying. What is the point of you giving the final exam? Because I can hear educators all in my head right now, but I need to know what they got from my class. Okay, I hear you folks. I do. We don't need to give them a final exam for that. Instead, your time is much better spent creating, say, a portfolio of all the things, getting your kids to sit down and look through their progress from the year. Use it as a reflective experience. What have you gained from our time together? What skills have you learned? What evidence can you show of what you've learned? Let's think about that. Let's look at what we're proud of. Let's look at the growth that we've made, the expanse that we've covered. That time that would be spent on a final exam that, for better, for worse, really, there's no for better, is just there to act as like a gatekeeper between, do you get the credit for this class or not? Instead of that, why are we not using this as a time for reflection? And on top of that, if you are truly an educator who is asking yourself, what have these students gotten from my class and from my teaching? A final exam is not going to tell you nearly as much as asking them, what did you get from my class? What did you learn this year? What of my instructional approaches worked best for you? What suggestions do you have for me for the next class of students that I teach? You are going to get a hell of a lot more from that than you are from a final exam.
Oh, Katelynn, yes, 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 and yes, 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 and yes. And agree with everything you said. And again, I'm going to add more to it because I was hoping I was going to disagree with you on this one. I was hoping because I wanted to have a match with somebody. I wanted somebody to say,
I'll disagree with you for sure.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I prefer it when you don't, because I'm afraid you'll put me to shame. But yes, all that you said, but there are more pieces to this puzzle as well. The whole idea of this final exam, again, presupposes that the final exam is more accurate evidence than any of the other evidence that you've collected throughout the year, which then brings into question the other evidence that you've collected all year long, which then brings into question the reporting of that information all year long, which then means you might have been inaccurately communicating with parents, stakeholders, and students all year long. If you're saying, well, no, it was accurate. It was a perfect demonstration of what the kid knew at that time. then why do you need a final exam? Oh, I know. The answer is to figure out if they still know that information, if they still remember that information, which is sure. I understand that logic, but I also understand I've had literally thousands of conversations with educators about final exams. And a question that I have asked educators everywhere when it comes to final exams, has a student ever surprised you with their score on a final exam? And there are times when students surprise teachers and they say, oh my gosh, I did not know that that student had that in them, which I want you to think about that for a second. If you're being surprised on a final exam, that tells us something about the assessment you had all year long. Or it tells us that the student did something differently, that they learned something differently, probably independent of your instruction. What tends to happen when a student gets a bad grade on a final exam is we say that student didn't study hard enough. That student didn't work hard enough. Or if a student just needs to get a better grade, they need to get a better final exam score, we'll say, you just need to go study more. Let's go back to what John Hattie said. All assessments need to be used formatively and summatively so that we as the educator can determine what we need to be doing differently to help support the student, not so that we can assign blame, not so we can tell the student this is all on you. Assessments should drive us to our next steps. And if we're saying that all a student has to do to learn the information needed for your class is to sit in the room by themselves with a book and to learn the information, all you have done, said teacher, is say that you are not needed. The student could have learned all this stuff independent of you, which is a complete aberration from the truth. The truth is students need you, which means we don't need to say, in order for me to figure out if I'm a good teacher, you need to go sit in your room by yourself, memorize a bunch of index cards, because that's not what teachers do. Teachers teach kids. So, and okay, let me go this far as well, because I've also had people say, but Dave, in college, they take final exams. Yeah, they do. They do. And you know what? How many college professors are pedagogical experts that truly study how students learn? None. They are content experts. Just because they do it wrong doesn't mean you do. The difference between most K-12 educators and most college educators is most K-12 educators study their craft and they figure out how to teach effectively so that students can learn for mastery. That's the difference. Most higher ed experts are experts in content knowledge. They are experts in whatever field of study they are experts in. They spend 2/3 of their time doing more research on that content. They spend 1/3 of their time teaching students, assessing students, giving students assignments. They don't spend time researching how people learn. You do. This is why you are amazing. So just because somebody else does it wrong doesn't mean you should. We tell this to our 12-year-olds all the time. Just because it's popular doesn't mean it's right. Same thing here. Do what's right. Oh,
yes, that. No, but it's true though. And what I'm hearing you say is that we're going to go ahead and like do this whole thing with K-12 and then we're going to go take on higher ed next. That's what I'm hearing you say. But it's just like, it's one of those things that I feel like just needs to be fleshed out, because the other piece of final exams that just really, really gets me is that there's so many questions on final exams that are like Googleable. And I say that a lot because I just feel like there's a lot of things that me as an adult, like sort of, I mean, I'm kind of an adult. I pretend to be one in my normal life. I Google things all the time. Like if I don't know the answer to something, I look it up on my phone. That's what we do. If I can't remember the difference between latitude and longitude, and I'm going to Google it on my phone. I don't understand why a Googleable question, a question that your students could easily just go look up, is going to be evidence of their understanding in your content area, is going to be evidence of your teaching.
So Katelynn, I feel like this is going to be a bad analogy, or maybe it's a good analogy. I feel like you are the Martin Luther of education, not Martin Luther King, the Martin Luther of education. So no, for real. So let's go back a couple hundred years when the religious elites wanted people to think the only way people could learn about the Holy Scriptures or to learn about the Bible was from showing up and listening to an expert say, here's the information. It's the only way you can learn it is if you go to the church and you listen to the priest give you the information. Martin Luther said, actually, I think we should be able to read this for ourselves. I think we should be able to figure this out ourselves. And he was persecuted because he wanted people to be able to understand things on their own or to find information on their own. For hundreds of years in education, we've had the same mindset that we as the educators are the ones that have all the sacred knowledge. And the only way that you can receive said knowledge is to come through us. And then the world invented phones and Google and all these other little devices that are now allowing people to get the information. And we're saying, no. You can't go there for the information. You have to come through me. And instead of us evolving and saying, wow, that actually frees us up to now teach some skills that truly matter. All these things that we've said for a long time, I wish I would have learned this in school. You now have the freedom to teach that stuff in school because this little thing is taking all that other stuff out of your purview. You don't have to worry about that anymore. Apple's got it covered. Google's got it covered. Now you can focus on the focus, people. You no longer need to be the sage on the stage with all the information. Let the kids get it somewhere else.
Well, and more than that too, teach them how to do that responsibly and well. Teach them how to find quality information.
Oh, sort of like the difference between formative and summative, because that's a big thing, right? I mean, we've gone full circle here. This is something that we need to take ownership as well. You can't just say, let me look up formative, because I guarantee if you were to pause right now or open a new browser, again, don't leave us. But if you were in 9 minutes to go and Google formative assessment, you're going to find 15 books that talk about formative assessment inaccurately, because they don't cite the research. They say, according to Johnny Smith, according to Susie Jones, according to someone, and it's just a bunch of people that came up with the definition that's not based off of research.
Yes. Okay, so one other thing that I just feel like needs to be addressed here, because we've gotten into this now and we've talked a lot about final exams, and this is another question that comes up a lot, and it's one of the topics that I get.
Is this but Katelynn? Is it one of those? Sorry, I did that for Carrie. Go ahead.
Yes, it probably would be one, but I feel like you're so fired up right now. Like it's my favorite, so I'm just gonna like kind of poke you a little bit. I feel like we bring up this idea of like, okay, so if we're doing this, if we're allowing our students to show us what they know, we're at the end of a course, we're not giving a final exam, we're gonna do something different, blah, blah, blah. Won't every single one of my kids get an A? Won't every single one of my kids pass my class? And we have this conversation then that comes up, and in higher ed, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they like to call it grade inflation.
So there's a couple of, number one, I don't want to equate it to higher ed, because in higher ed, professors are evaluated based off of student surveys. Basically, does a student like you, which means, in essence, grades are going to be inflated in higher ed because professors want students to like them. So let's take that off the equation. Again, not a best practice. But if we're talking K-12, will all students pass my class? All students will pass your class if your grades are based off of compliance and all you care about is, did the kid turn something in? Yep, they absolutely will. But if your grades are based off of evidence of mastery in a given moment of time, the only way every single student will pass your class or get an A or whatever that is if every single student in that given moment of time has demonstrated mastery according to the standard. Now, this opens up the door to a lot of other conversations, because in a lot of places, the system that we are part of, that we have helped design, that we play a part in changing or reforming, says that teachers are evaluated based off of whether or not students are growing or whether or not they're showing mastery. And a teacher cannot show weakness in that regard. A teacher cannot come to their principal, their administrator, their evaluator and say, little Johnny or little Susie struggled in my class because they did not demonstrate mastery, because that's going to be used against us to slap a label on us and indict us, as opposed to lead to an actionable next step of what we can be doing differently. Once we create that system where we say, yeah, it's okay to say, I'm struggling, I don't know, I didn't do something right, little Johnny struggled, I struggled, and we can then determine a next step as opposed to a judgment or a label, then I guarantee we'll have more and more students that we're comfortable saying is struggling, that they're not demonstrating mastery, and we want to do something about it. Because it's not about compliance, it's not about work ethic, it's not about behaviors, it's not about me being good, you being bad. It is, what's the next step?
Absolutely. And I always come back to this, because if you're in a traditional system and that's something that concerns you, If you're teaching in this traditional structure and you're like, okay, but what if all of my students do well? First off, ask yourself, number one, why are you asking that question? And who are you referring to? Because if you're asking, are some of my students who might be neurodivergent, are some of my students who may not have always succeeded going to do well and going to do better? That is not something that you need to readdress, and you need to look at that implicit bias that you have there. First off. Second of all, if somebody comes at you and tells you, well, how come so many of your students are doing so well? How come all of your kids are doing so well? I would respond to that with a question. Isn't that my job to make sure that they're learning? That's the goal. You want your students to be doing well. You want them to be growing and learning. That is literally your job. So if somebody has a problem with you doing your job and doing it well, I say, point that out to them. Respectfully, professionally, but point that out to them.
And I'll say, and that actually opens the door to an amazing conversation you can have with that person. Going back to the way that you framed our conversation today, when they say all of your students are doing well. Awesome. Why do you think they're doing well? What gives you that indication? Well, everybody's getting an A in your class. Really? What does that A tell you? Does that tell you that they all did the work? No, that's not what it means at all. It doesn't mean that every single student turned everything in by the due date. It doesn't mean that they crossed every T and dotted every I. What it means is I had standards out and I assessed every student according to the standard, and I got evidence that shows their mastery and their proficiency, their progress over time. And here is that evidence. Would you like to help me grade these things in the future so we can have future alignment to make sure that we are both assessing these standards the same way for validity? I guarantee they're going to be like, no, I'm good. Well done. But if they say, yes, let's do that, amazing. Because that's the goal. Because we talked a lot about John Hattie's research. Teacher efficacy is right up near the top as well, which means having teachers aligned with practices, values, and beliefs where they're all doing things in a consistent way towards a common goal. So bring people together.
Yes. Do it. Have the conversation. Poke the bear a little bit there, because it's valuable and it will open the door for something important. And that's how we make this big structural change, folks. It's those small conversations that we continue to have. It's those pieces where we recognize, okay, I've done some learning and some growth. I'm seeing this differently. Now I'm going to bring some more people along with me. Now I'm going to challenge this when I see it, and I'm going to open the door for further conversation and further growth among myself, my colleagues, my professionals, the people that I'm connected with. That's how we do it. That 100%. Is how it works.
Yep. Sometimes it's a whole lot easier to have a difficult conversation when you're all conversing around something similar that's on the table in front of you. So when you already know that people disagree philosophically about grades or assessment or any taboo topic in schools, don't necessarily debate each other, debate the topic. Put something on the table. Put student work on the table and debate the quality of the evidence that you have in front of you. You're not debating the child, you're debating the quality, which then leads the way to that conversation. You can debate the thing that Katelynn and I have done for 4 weeks now. Share this with your friends, share this with your colleagues, share this with your peers, and then you can debate how ridiculous we are, so that you're no longer debating each other. Use some third party, use something that neither one of you have staked a claim in, that neither one of you have created. Going up Bloom's taxonomy, start by evaluating something else before you start reflecting on something you've created. Because when you're reflecting on something you've created, you have your own personal bias. So use us to start that conversation if it helps.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Use us for that, please.
Well, Katelynn, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I'm going to tell you the question I'm going to ask you in a second, but the question is going to be give them something quick and tactical that they can take and implement in their classrooms in the next couple of weeks, because we do have 2 weeks before we come back together again. Next week is Teacher Appreciation Week, and the Teach Better team is going live every single night next week with amazing people popping on the screen, sharing amazing value, amazing content, affirming and validating all of the hard work that educators everywhere are doing, which means we're taking the week off from that. But then we come back in 2 weeks just to try to answer questions, to wrap all of this up. So you've got 2 weeks, people, to send us questions. We may or may not have some special guests join us to ask us some questions on the spot to poke us so that we can poke them back. If you have questions over the next 2 weeks, reach out to us on social media. You can DM us. You can email us, just reach out to us and let us know what your questions are. And we will make sure that in 2 weeks, we address your individual concerns, questions, comments, topics, all the things. And then we're done with this for now. For now. So Katelynn, before people sign off, give them something they can hang their head on and say, okay, all this big stuff, where do I start?
Okay, so I have a couple of suggestions for everybody. So
a couple? I said one. Look at you.
Yeah,
okay.
I have a couple. So one of them has to do with assessment and grading specifically in your classrooms. This is one of the most valuable things that I did in my classroom when I began my restructuring, reframing, rethinking of assessment. We've talked a lot about standards and identifying your learning objectives and communicating them clearly. You can make huge differences in your assessments, the ones that you're using formatively, the ones that you plan to use summatively, simply by very clearly on all of them, putting that learning goal right at the top. Let them know, and then students will see how those connect because it's right there for them. They can see, this is the learning goal that I am demonstrating on this assessment. And they'll be able to see every assessment very clearly. It also will help to make sure that your assessments are aligned to one another. So if you have a test, a project, a quiz, whatever it might be coming at the end of instruction, if you have something you intend to use summatively, the students will see that learning goal and recognize it from all those other ones that they've done along the way. It's a really simple thing to start implementing in your practice, and one that makes way more difference than I ever anticipated it would. So that is my first suggestion for everyone. Something really like tactical, practical, literally something you can go do. The second thing is not necessarily about grading and assessment, though it probably will be. I would like everyone, this is going to be like a little challenge. If you're an ambassador, it's like a Monday challenge, but it's not Monday, it's Wednesday. It's a Katelynn challenge. I would like you to start a conversation with a colleague, a peer, somebody in your learning network, either on social or in person, about something you've heard in our Focus on the Focus series that has resonated with you. I want you to be the conversation starter, to go out and poke the bear, to go out and maybe bring it up, to go out and be the starter, be the igniter in that moment. Start the conversation and see where it takes you. Don't shy away from the discomfort and the uncomfortable feelings. Lean into them and be okay with the fact that it may not end with a resolution, but it will get you both further along in your journey.
Katelynn Giordano, you are amazing. You are just flat out amazing.
You're amazing.
Oh my goodness. This is so good. So good. People, if you are not already connected with Katelynn, just connect with her right now. KN Giordano on all the things. It's right there. Yeah, you can see it on the screen. Connect with her again. Continue the conversations. If you've got more questions, if you want to dive deeper, just reach out. We'll be back in 2 weeks to continue this conversation, to wrap it up, to sing bye, 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 to do all of those sorts of things. So next week, May 5th, we are not here. Teacher Appreciation Week, Cinco de Mayo. Nobody wants to see me talking grades on Cinco de Mayo. I'll just tell you that. So we'll come back on May 12th, wrap this conversation up for now. Until then, go out there, start those conversations, put those learning targets at the top of whatever it is that you're doing. Focus on the focus, have the conversations, and we will see you soon.
Bye.